Hello, everybody. We're excited to have with us today Janine Dunnage. Janine is a people and culture consultant with corporate experience at Unilever and also has worked to develop business and people performance strategies for companies such as Cognition Foundry, which specializes in blockchain-enabled technologies and AI solutions, as well as XPO Logistics, which specializes in supply chain and warehousing logistics management. Janine sits on a number of advisory boards and coaching platforms, including here on the Sustainability Advisory Board. We're going to be having a conversation today about sustainability to get to know a little bit more about the topic, the people that are involved in sustainability. Janine, thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with us today.
You're most welcome. I'm so looking forward to our conversation. So great to be here.
So we'll get started right at the top with our toughest question. We talk about sustainability. Companies or people, they talk about sustainability and it can be a difficult concept or difficult to understand all the various elements. What does business sustainability mean to you?
Yeah, and I agree. I think that is a really complex and large question. And I think for me, sustainability has many elements to it. I know we're talking specifically about business sustainability, but I think it's tempting when you talk about sustainability to kind of focus on the climate change angle of sustainability, because in the end, or the environmental impact, because in the end, you switch on the TV or you look at your various media channels on your telephone, and quite often you're looking at the political discussions or the way the media is directing you. And it tends to be a central focus on environment. What are we doing to environment and what are we doing about it? So before just thinking about what does business sustainability mean to me, I think the first thing I wanted to think about was actually what's the definition of sustainability. And you can look this up. Any search engine on the internet will very quickly return you a definition. And the one that really came out to me was about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So that was a really pivotal statement for me. And I think that then really kind of gives the connotations around it that it isn't just an environmental issue, and of course that's a massive part of it, but there are people elements to this, a social element to it. So if I wanted to translate that into what does that mean for businesses, so if I kind of immediately translated that definition, there are many ways to do this, but for me that was a bit about ensuring the longevity of a business growth whilst not compromising the needs of the present or the ability of the future to meet their own needs. So a bit of a business connotation or slant to that sustainability definition there. So when I think about business sustainability, I really see it as business principles and ethics and the way the business subscribes to how it wants to run its business and how the leaders want to run the business. And it really needs to be part of the business's DNA and culture, which kind of then in turn leads to a real kind of business strategy and purpose for the long, mid and near long-term horizons. So I still feel that that's actually quite an overwhelming concept that I've just said there. So what I wanted to do was to kind of then maybe break that down a little bit more, because it really does depend on where a business is on their sustainability journey as to how complicated and overwhelming even that statement might seem to them. And then you can really kind of break that down into kind of an iterative process and really look at it from a baby steps perspective. So for me, from that kind of overarching definition, I would ask myself as a business 3 questions. So number 1, what are my business ethics and culture, and actually what do I want them to be? Number 2, do I understand my business impacts on the environment, but also on my employees and on the wider society, and what measures do I have in place? And then number 3, quite simply, right, I've got the answers to number 1 and 2, and now what am I going to do with those answers? So what am I going to do now? So for me, business sustainability is really about understanding kind of the full picture and the end-to-end picture of the business from an environmental perspective, from a financial perspective, but also from a business culture and society perspective.
That's perfect, actually, because that's going to give us our segue. And if you don't mind, you brought in kind of the environment and the society as part of sustainability. But if you don't mind, let's focus a little bit more on people and the individuals. I think you gave us, I really like this, the right people in the right roles, and the three questions you kind of gave us to help us answer. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about specific examples where we can kind of use this learning and development lens as we look at sustainability of a company of your choice or a project of your choice, so we can kind of maybe relate that to something a little bit more actionable, so we can understand, how you gave us.
Yes.
I really like this kind of right people and right roles. So I'll kind of send that question back out to you.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, I can. I mean, I'll talk about a project, and maybe it has a bit of a right people in the right roles part to it, but also it's about that kind of wider social responsibility, I think, that a business
Perfect.
has part of its sustainability plan. So I was involved in a project. So when I worked a few years ago as a HR business partner and in the learning and development space for Unilever, so one of the companies that I worked for quite some time, and part of Unilever's corporate social responsibility, and I think this is a really strong element of the social sustainability side of a business's sustainability plan, was around youth employability. So this is about, and this kind of goes back to the definition as well of giving future generations the ability to meet their needs, and nothing's more important within that for future generations to meet their needs is the youth employability. So something that I was working on was about a youth employability scheme, which was in the United Kingdom. So a national approach, but really brought that to a local level, so that it was about the local society in which the business that I was working at the time was operating in. And what we did, and I had a great team, I didn't do this alone, so I did this collectively of a great team that was working with me at the time, and was we forged relationships with the local employment centre, so in the United Kingdom we call them job centres, and wanted to reach out to them and understand about what youth employability was like in the area and what we could do to help. So what they did was asked us if we would run some workshops for them. So to really to look to engage and inspire those young people. So we're talking about people kind of in that 16 to 24, 25 bracket that are struggling to find employment for varying reasons. And at the moment, at that point in time, were earning through benefits. So they were getting benefits, but they weren't able to paid work. And there were varying reasons for that. But these people were people that for some reason, the education system had let them down, maybe. Perhaps they had a family breakdown as well. And in some cases, themselves had started a family young, so they had a baby or young children that they needed to kind of manage, which can always affect your employability, and they just didn't have the confidence to or maybe some of the skills to go out there and get a job. So I wanted to do two things really. The first thing was to inspire them, and that was by getting people to talk to them in these workshops. Now, it wasn't about bringing in some kind of high flyer in the business that had a completely different socioeconomic background and different opportunities to tell them how wonderfully they'd done in Unilever or in another organization. It was about actually using the local workforce, the people at work at the site that I was working, to come in and talk to them about, I have a similar background to you. I even may have gone to the same school as you, and look at how I'm doing. And this is the opportunities that I had, and this is how, I'm earning money. I'm in a paid job, that it is possible to really inspire them at a local level with people that they could identify with. And then the second thing I wanted to do was to, address some of the skills that they were lacking in. So, help with resumes or CV writing skills, and writing that all important kind of introductory letter. Digital skills, a lot of the way we apply for roles now is all online, and if you're missing those digital skills because you haven't had the opportunity to practice them, and it's quite surprising actually how many people don't have ready access to the digital tools and technology to do that, and then to support them with that.
So thank you. I really think that really got to this kind of right people in the right roles and gave us a concrete example of the impact. that a company can have. So, I mean, if you don't mind, we'll push a little bit on this.
Oh.
You really brought in society, individuals, and the people as we talk about the sustainability journey for a company. For whatever reason, and you mentioned the UN SDGs, so we'll kind of go back to those. Individuals and training and people in society are part of the UN SDGs. So why do you think it's the case that a lot of companies are spending more time on the environmental sustainability element than society, which is, just as an important part overall?
Yes, your environmental impact by the tools and technologies that are out there. There's plenty of them, and what's my business's CO2 emissions? What am I doing about water scarcity, and and to kind of deal and recycle with that. What am I doing about my greenhouse emissions? When I'm in industry, the transport and those kind of things. And these things are very, very measurable, as I say. And there's lots of tools and techniques to do that, and lots of external parties that can help you do that. The social aspects, I think, are less tangible. Now, not all of them. We spoke about the UN SDGs, and number one is no poverty, and that's very tangible. That's actually measurable because each country has a kind of poverty line. There's a global standard, of course, as well. That people would understand, and each country has a poverty line, and you can measure who is on it, above it, below it. And in the developing world as well, we know there are enormous issues with poverty. It's very clear and everyone can see. But perhaps some of the other social impacts, like does a youth employability program that I just spoke about actually make a difference to the community, and how do I measure it? These are much more difficult to measure and complicated to measure. They're kind of the intangible results of a company's corporate social responsibility. And I think that therefore it's less easy to focus on them.
I mean, this is going to be a direct question. Society is more of a difficult thing to measure, like you said, difficult to look at. Do you mind elaborating on your career a little bit and telling us how you saw the value in this and why you decided to kind of go down this more difficult path?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So from a career perspective, so I've been in business for more over 30 years. So I started out when I was 17 and I started my own business and I ran that business. It's in the service sector and I ran that business for about 10 years. And during that time, I also did my degree. So I did my degree in psychology at the same time while I was running the business. So and that had a really strong people element to it. So I ran a dance school, I was a dancer, and my customers were people. So I've always had that people element. After those 10 years, I moved into corporate business. So I sold my business and moved into the corporate business and worked for Unilever actually for 19 years. And the majority of my 19 years in Unilever were in the kind of people and culture space, so learning and development, so education, really important part of that. As a HR business partner, so doing all of the elements of people and culture, and then more latterly in talent, so the global talent manager for Unilever. And then in the last 2 years, I've been working and living internationally, and I've actually gone into the kind of agile and consultancy working space. So now I'm a people and culture consultant, and I mean, you mentioned earlier when you spoke about me, the kind of businesses that I've worked with. So I think it's fair to say that for the majority of my career, I've always worked with people in a people element type role. So everyone works with people, of course, but actually specifically in that area. And I really has given me the unique opportunity to see the value that people can bring, not just to an organization, but to the wider society. And I just wanted to, I did want to just tell you a small story actually about my real social awakening that really made me see the value in society. So this was about 15 years ago. So I'm a little bit ashamed to say that it was 15 years ago because people have kind of worked out, my age bracket by now. And, I'm thinking, well, 15 years ago, I should have been thinking about this much earlier than that, I'm sure. But as a growing up person, I was aware of sustainability and social issues. You know, there was some big things going on in my youth, like, for example, Live Aid. I don't know if you've heard of that, but of course
Yes.
that was all around the Ethiopian famine,
Yes.
and two particular pop stars that really brought that to the masses, what was going on there. And we all saw Live Aid, and we all watched it, and we all contributed, and then we all carried on with our lives and didn't think too much more about what was happening, you know, kind of across the other side of the world. But about 15 years ago, a work colleague came to me and with a pamphlet of a charitable organisation. And he said to me, Janine, would you be interested in this? I want to build a toilet. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You want to build a toilet? What is this all about? And he said, and he told me a story. He said, so I'm talking about this charity that is supporting rural India, you know, and there are villages in rural India that they don't have access to you know, basic sanitation, to the point of they don't even have a toilet they can use. So these villages, these people, they have to go out into the woods. You know, they're normally farmers, so they have to go out into the woods or go onto the edges of their farmland when they need to do the basic human function that everyone needs to do several times a day. And I said, well, you know, that's just terrible. These people, you know, everyone should have a basic human right. And we know about the SDG goals there, you know, to sanitation and clean water, and certainly sanitation. And he said, yes, that's right. And actually, it's worse than that, Janine, because I'm talking about people's safety here. And I'm not just talking about people's safety from a health perspective and all of the things that go along with not having the right sanitation in place, but I'm actually talking about girls and young women's safety, because when they need to go to use the toilet in the early morning or in the late evening when it's dark, and I'm sure they try not to, they are putting their lives at risk every single time they go into those woods or they go to the edge of their land, because because boys and men lay in wait for them, and if they're unlucky, a boy or a man finds them and their personal safety is at risk. You know, they either are subject to some kind of sexual assault, or they're you know, what's much worse than that, but beaten and left to die. So every single time they go, they need to go to the toilet when it is, you know, dark and quiet. They are risking their personal safety. And I want to build a village, a toilet, so that we can keep girls and young women safe, because everybody should be safe to perform their basic human functions. And yeah, and so we did. You know, it was £5 each. So, you know, in US dollars, I don't know, these days that's probably about six, because the British pound is pretty weak at the moment. So it's probably about $6 each to build a toilet that could keep those women and girls safe in that village. And we had a picture of it. So the charity went off there, they built their toilet and they showed us a picture. But for me in my career, that was just a real social awakening of how unequal society is, and how we have a responsibility, particularly in the developed world, where we can make a difference and help the developing worlds to really do something, make a difference, and do things like eradicate poverty, you know, nobody go hungry, people have access to clean water and sanitation, everything that we take for granted really in the developed world. And there are issues in the developed world, we know that, around poverty as well. There are plenty of think tanks around kind of people on the poverty line who shouldn't be in the developed world, but we have to look at it as a complete picture. So that just tells you a bit about my career, and also perhaps a bit about my social awakening of the importance that people can have in society when we look at sustainability.
That was wonderful to hear, and I think that was an excellent story. I think it really gives some kind of food for thought as we think of the role that we as individuals play, and then the role companies can play in society beyond kind of the society around us or that we see. as we think about big picture?
Let's, for example, talk about the pandemic. So I think it's impossible to have a conversation right now without talking about the pandemic, because it's a global catastrophe. Everyone knows about it. It has impacted every single person on the planet because it's everywhere. And we can see that we're not out of the pandemic yet, because, if you look at India at the moment, getting 200,000 also cases a day, and their issues with depleting oxygen and having to make those terrible decisions: who do I give oxygen to and who I don't? So we really are in a real catastrophe within the pandemic. And if we think about things like some of the outcomes from that, though, that have been reported on, so of course there's the loss of life, and I think all of us would want to be fist bumping because we can't shake hands or hug at the moment any healthcare professional that we meet, and the incredible jobs they've done. But I think, though, that there are other kind of things that have come out of the pandemic that businesses need to think about and be aware of. So this is about the kind of long-term effect that we've seen on those that are the lower paid people in the sectors. So we're looking at people that have lost their jobs, that have been furloughed, which in the end is kind of just delaying, I guess, the threat of them losing their jobs and incomes, because when you're furloughed, you don't really know if you're going to get that back again. And those have tended to be in the lower paid sectors, so hospitality, retail and service sectors, and the manufacturing construction sectors have tended to be able to stay open. And that's a bit about the kind of the political arena of the pandemic and the decisions that the leaders of the countries have made. And what we've also seen is how heavily reliant we are, certainly in the developed societies, on our frontline workers. I think that's come to the forefront. And I'm not just talking about the healthcare workers who, as I said, are doing these incredible jobs, but I'm also talking about the people that come and collect our refuge, take our waste and recycling away, keep the streets clean, the people that drive our public transport so we can get around and do our day-to-day stuff as we're able to, and that's really highlighted that these people, they keep us going. The people that work in the grocery store, the lower paid roles that are clearly absolutely pivotal for a society to continue as we know it. And you might ask me kind of why I'm talking a bit around these data points when you're asking the question that you asked, and how to get companies to really go on that sustainability journey and to care. But I think all of these points, are important for a company to really understand, because in the end, if we are excluding, half our workforce. So, for example, we know that people that have been furloughed and lost their jobs have been disproportionately more women than men, and that's several reasons for that. It's because the sectors that I spoke about tend to be more women dominated, and the sectors that have stayed open tend to be more male dominated. So we've seen a real difference there. And we've kind of seen a widening of the gender parity, or a widening of the gap there because of that. We've also seen that homeschooling has had an incredible impact on parents. However, generally tended to impact much more heavily the women who take on the domestic responsibilities than the men. And some of that can be because they're already furloughed, for example, and perhaps in the lower paid roles and working part-time. And as a business, you need to think about, well, do I want to lose half my workforce, or the opportunity to employ half of the talent pool, because those people are being they've lost their jobs, they're busy doing domestic stuff, they're taking on the domestic responsibility. I'm not going to call it a burden, but responsibility of homeschooling, for example, and picking up those parts there. So, and I think that really then plays to a business looking at its already in place policies and saying, have I got policies in place that ensure that doesn't happen? Because when we look at think tanks and when we look at some of the reporting, what we can see from businesses that are surviving the pandemic situation is that they are the ones that are robust and resilient. So if they have resilience in their supply chain, if they have resilience in their people policies, if they already have policies that allow parental leave, for example, that allow people to take time off, that have ways of working around in a flexible way to enable people to perhaps do both, then we can see those businesses that are standing up and being much more resilient, still growing, still looking at future growth than perhaps the businesses that are really now struggling. And I think that that's just a really important part of why businesses should care about the sustainability and the social side of that, is that they can really see the resilience in their business by having those right policies in place. And in the end, we all know really that diversity, equity and inclusion is a really important part of businesses, making sure that you have a diverse team at your leadership table is reflected very heavily in the kind of standards and the frameworks that are being driven. And if don't have those in place, then you won't have that kind of diversity of thought, which is so important when you're looking at your business strategies going forward, and your business reputation. Because in the end, you're only a business as long as people are buying your products and your services. And if you don't have this kind of fantastic business reputation, or it's stained, then people will, walk with their feet, walk with their pockets potentially, and go elsewhere. And then you don't have a business anymore. So really think caring about your sustainable strategy is an important way to ensure business growth.
So I really like kind of these examples you gave us. Almost like a financial ROI that we saw on the positive impact of investing in people, right? Companies that have these practices are more resilient if they're thinking about their people, or understand maybe how they're treated their workers. Their supply chains are a little bit more resilient, so they're able to kind of bounce back a little bit better or respond better to this COVID shock.
Yes.
Why do you think other companies don't see this? I mean, you clearly you've seen the business case for sustainability, or the value that sustainability has. Other companies have invested in it. Why do you think other companies don't see that? I mean, what needs to happen for them to see the value out of sustainability?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of answers to this. So I think the first thing is that it does go to a company culture and its DNA. And I think I said this quite early on. So if you have a company culture and a DNA of caring about sustainability, then it kind of fulfills itself. And I've worked in a lot of organizations, or with organizations that have that real feeling throughout their business and throughout their business models, and can really see the benefits that sustainability and having those business plans in place can be. I think when we think about companies that don't see this, I think we can consider that perhaps they're not looking at their long-term future. So I think there are a lot of organizations, particularly right now, when we look at the kind of economic crisis that has come out of the pandemic, we've got a lot of businesses out there that are thinking short-term. So short-term gains, my bottom line. What's my bottom line? How do I make sure as a business I pay myself, I pay my employees, and I've got the money to buy the materials that I need if I'm making a product, or the services that I do. And they're kind of putting in place these very short-term strategies and goals just to keep their business afloat, and kind of caught up in the day-to-day firefighting of what it's all about when ensuring your bottom line. And it doesn't give them necessarily the opportunity to kind of consider their longer term horizons, the longevity of the business, that some of these sustainability frameworks would actually give them if they had the opportunity to look at it. And so I think it's quite a lot around that. And maybe, there are the select few that are only interested in lining their pocket, so they're really not interested. But I don't think that's most people. I think, on the whole, people are inherently good. They want to do the right thing. And some of it is just about that short-term profitability that they need to keep their eye on. And I do think that goes a little way to kind of the capitalist and commercial societies in which we live in the kind of developed markets, which is a real kind of a me first concept or mentality. So I think we do have, as a society in the developed countries, a bit of a me first framework, and I think that can fuel those short-term profit gains. And I think that it's not all bad. I think there is an assumption that if you look after yourself, the rest will follow. By looking after myself, I therefore start to look after everyone else. But I wonder if that's not really working when we think about sustainability. And if you look at the frameworks that are in place, it's not really a me first kind of way of thinking. But I think that does tend to be where businesses end up that perhaps aren't thinking or caring about their sustainability impact, both from a social and an environmental perspective.
Perfect. I really kind of like this idea that you talked about, where it's the longevity of the business. People are just worried about putting out the daily fires, and they're not worried about the longevity. And that's really at the core of sustainability, is the company being around in a little bit. Let's kind of shift focus for just a few minutes. We don't have a commercial break here, so let's kind of take a quick break and ask you some personal questions, if you don't mind. You can check if you're. Well, I'll get started. Does that sound good?
It does. Now you
Perfect.
go ahead.
Okay,
Yes, I'm
so
ready.
you can check your phone if you want to. But what's the last good song that you remember listening to?
No, I do remember it, and it is "Purple Rain" by the great late Prince. I think that I absolutely remember, a real one, probably from my childhood, and I think a fantastic song.
Perfect. What is one app that you cannot live without on your phone?
Okay, well, Amrou, I mean, as you know, I'm British. Come on, what do you think it is? It's the weather app, of course. In Britain, that's all we talk about. Half our lives we spend talking about the weather, and I'm obsessed with it. I definitely couldn't do without checking my weather on an hourly basis.
Can you tell us two truths and one lie? I'll try and guess.
Okay, so, all right, here goes. I have flown and landed a plane. I once had a part as an extra on Doctor Who, and the episode was Revenge of the Cybermen. And I was once in Sicily on holiday, walking down a side street with my children that were quite young, and Al Pacino and his entourage walked straight past me. My claim to fame.
I'm going to go with the Doctor Who example. That was a little too specific on the episode.
No, you're right.
Yeah. But I assume all British people have been an extra on that show at one point or their time.
I'm not a very good liar. That was excellent. Straight in there.
Lastly, what's one thing that people you work with don't normally know about you?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to admit to being a really bad employee. So when I was actually setting up my business, when I was about 17, I worked for one day in McDonald's, and then I resigned at the end of the day. So yeah, a really bad employee.
Great. Thank you for sharing. It's always nice to remember that our guests are nice people in addition to being great at their jobs. Let's kind of shift focus back a little bit as we're talking kind of about sustainability and measuring it, and how do we, specifically social sustainability. I mean, how do I look at a company, or our listeners or anybody watching, kind of, how can they look at a company and say, okay, they're doing a good job on sustainability?
Yeah. Okay, so I think we spoke a little bit about standards earlier, and I think this is really where they start to come into play. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, the first part is that you need to know and understand your business from an end-to-end perspective. So know your business story, what your business stands for, and how it operates throughout its value chain. The impact and processes that it has on the environment, knowing your numbers, and then knowing how you treat your employees, how you treat your people, how you treat the wider communities in which you operate, and also how your partners and your suppliers treat their people, what's their value chain, what's their ethics, because I think you can't have kind of a sustainability journey that is just internal, just relevant to your own business, to really address the sustainability issues and have a strong kind of business ethic and principle in place. You need to be looking at your end to end, as we said. So in a circular way, actually. So you need to look at your suppliers, you need to look at your partners that you operate with. And you also need to be thinking about, your consumers and your clients, the people that buy your products or your services, what are they like? Who are they? And if it's a product, what are they doing with that product in the end? So I think that's the first thing. It's understanding your story, and then how do you say that you're doing a good job? So you need to use the frameworks and standards that are there. So we spoke about the SDGs. So I think they're a good starting point because they're very broad. There's 17 of them, and then they're like buckets, and you can kind of put parts of your business and your strategy and your plan, into buckets against the 17, hopefully all of them, and see how you're doing. So that kind of gives you kind of a good review of your business and your business story. But I think increasingly it needs to be kind of more than that. It can't just be well, yes, I'm doing this, and that sits against zero hunger, for example, or I'm doing this and that means that I'm reducing my impact on water use. I think it needs to be much more measurable than that. And something that I've been kind of reading about recently is the ESG standard, so the environment, social, governance standard, that seems to be coming much more to the forefront, and you can see businesses beginning to make public actually their ESG frameworks, principles, and kind of their journey. And this is really sitting kind of under the financial services side of the sector, and beginning to fall within the business's financial results. And I think it's also actually a great way to tell a business's CSR story, so the corporate social responsibility story, because that can be, we spoke about, difficult to kind of really measure some of those areas that your business is working within, and using that kind of those governance and standards that's coming out within the finance side of your business, with very respected, tangible, familiar part of the business story, if you like, kind of really gives it that credibility. And I think by building your ESG as a business, you'll really start to see how your business is kind of faring, and how you're doing a good job or where you need to improve, and also, are you actually doing what you say you do? Because I think what it is sometimes perhaps a growing concern in the public eye is, a business says it's doing what it says it's doing, but actually, how do I know it's really doing it? How do I know that it's walking the talk and not just trying to sell a good story for their kind of employer branding, or for when the auditors come round? And I think by having those kind of tangible measures that the ESG standards are beginning to provide a business to work towards, really gives the business an opportunity to demonstrate not only that they have a strong kind of framework and story in place, but actually what are they delivering against it? How are they measuring up?
Wonderful. I mean, that really gets the wonderful summary, kind of getting to the core of what companies are doing, how we can kind of measure that as customers, and then it also sets a framework or a roadmap for companies as they embark on their sustainability journey to kind of I think you mentioned, where they are and understand where they need to be going, kind of helping them in the roadmap.
Sure.
Kind of a final shift. We talk a lot about corporate social responsibilities, how companies need to adapt and change. But there's also the personal element, right? What we do in our lives. I call it personal social responsibility. Are there some things that come to mind that you can share about what we as individuals can do and how we change our life? Or what we do?
No, absolutely. So yeah, and I completely think there are many things to do. So there is, of course, the first thing, which, the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. So I think, we're all consumers of products, of services, and certainly one way of ensuring that businesses that are doing the right thing, that are walking the talk, that have sustainability plans, strategies, outcomes in place, is to put your consumer hat on, look into the brands that you like and the brands that you use and the services that you use, and understand their sustainability journey. What's their impact on the environment, and what are they doing about it? Are they looking after their people? What are their policies like? Are there links to modern slavery and child labour, or actually are they actively, doing the opposite, doing something about that? Do they have an inclusive culture? Then you can really see, look at whether they walk the talk, and if they don't, you walk the talk yourself. You take your purse or your wallet out and you take it somewhere else.
Thank you very much for that answer, and thank you very much for all the answers to your questions. I think you've given us a lot to think about, and I hope a lot for a lot of people to act upon. I really want to thank you for your time.